Go.
Let's just go.
Kairos. The opportune moment. The perfect time. The perfect place. It is part of practically every rhetorical situation. Sometimes it is of little importance, but in other times, as in the revolution in Egypt, Kairos is everything. Everything relates to taking advantage of the opportune moment. In Egypt, as a dictatorship, the government's voice was the only voice. The people were repressed into silence. The government was able to skew information, show the world that that Egypt had an illusion of prosperity and support. In fact, my political science textbook showed that over 90% of Egyptians supported their government. That really makes this revolution seem like it came out of the blue. But that's not the people's voice. That's the government's justification of their rule, trying to show that they're a legitimate government and that their people are satisfied. But are they? Apparently not, because despite what the government said, Egypt was full of tension. It may not have looked like that from the outside, but seeing as I was there in December, I can tell you firsthand, the tension was there. There were police with AK-47s on every street corner. Every move was watched, every action controlled. The president lived in a palace, while the people lived in hastily built, poorly equipped apartments, with no running water or electricity. The people lived in poverty and hopelessness, while the supporters of the government lived in decadence. The situation was stretched to the limit. The poverty gap was enormous. An opportune moment was needed for the people to make their voice heard and finally say, enough is enough. Two events worked in combination to create this moment. The first was that President Hosni Mubarak declared that his son would succeed him as president. This was the last straw of injustices to the people. They had their rights repressed, and they barely had any say in the government at first, or so they thought. But this was just a slap in the face. They had no say. It was just a harsh dictatorship, and they finally realized that. This event shattered the feeble confidence the people had left in their government as a republic. It gave them a reason to have a democratic revolution. The other part of this was Tunisia. Tunisia is a North African nation who in mid-January had its own democratic revolution. Its government was oppressive and corrupt, and the people had had enough. They revolted for their rights as citizens and as human beings. This was the Kairos for Egypt. The moment was presented by Tunisia, perpetuated by the Mubarak situation, and it was embraced by the people. And their own anti-government protests began shortly afterwards. Mubarak could do nothing to stop this once it started. Change had gripped the nation. The police were sent out to contain the protesters and try to quiet them down, but to no avail. And some even joined the protesters, for they felt the same way as they did. The army was deployed next. But what could they do? They were the people, so they wouldn't harm the people. The same age group that was the core of the revolution was the young men who were in the army. Mubarak's last card was the secret police, who resorted to violence, oftentimes on camelback against the protesters. But they were too few in number to be able to take down the message that the protesters were perpetuating. Their message for rights, jobs, food, freedom, and Mubarak out of office. Despite all of this, Mubarak still refused to step down, and he explained that he needed to stay to ensure a smooth power transition, or in other words, so that he could set up the next government, and that he wanted to help them as much as he could. But his actions had never been supported by his words. His actions were oftentimes the complete opposite of what he said he would do. He had ultimately failed as a leader, and the army removed him the next day. They set themselves up in the government, and it is unclear as to what government will be installed next, a democratic one, as the people want, or an authoritarian regime once again. But what is known for sure is that the voice of the people was heard, and the voice of the people was strong. The Kairos of the situation was not limited to simply Egypt. Egypt's situation created more Kairotic situations across the Middle East and North Africa. What Tunisia created for Egypt, Egypt created for Iran, Algeria, Bahrain, and several other nations. These nations have been able to take advantage of the moment presented to them by starting their own protests against their government. Hopefully all of these people will be able to attain the freedom they are fighting for, and that all others in their situation will be ready to grasp, when it comes, their own opportune moment.